Hello and welcome back to Frontier Regional School Election Night Coverage 2012. I am one of your hosts, Alex Fortune. We have with us Alexis Foley, who is another host, and Paul Newlin from the Whately Select Board. What you just heard would be Happy Days Are Here Again, which was FDR's campaign theme song in '29. Now, Mr. Newlin.
Mr. Fortune.
You are on the Select Board of Whately.
Correct.
You are another selectman. We had Joyce on earlier.
I know. Joyce,
I want to talk about that. You just came from the polls in Whately.
I did.
What was your experience there? What do you see happening?
Well, I rushed through to get through the voting, and your mother was there, and I noticed that about 924 people had voted in Whately already, which is
Wow.
more than I remember ever voting in an election. But, you know,
Could you remind us what the population of Whately is around?
1,600.
That's a significant percentage.
And that's everybody, 1,600. So
Wow.
900 people voting is a lot, is a very good percentage of the voting age population, I would say.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm encouraged. I got my vote sticker. I was surprised to see a question on the ballot about corporations, which I didn't realize was going to be on the ballot.
Was that
It must be a local initiative.
Was that question 4?
Yes.
I do believe that's a non-binding local initiative.
I'm sure it is.
So, you must have opinions on these sorts of things. What would you say is the most important issue facing Whateleyites and others in this election?
Whateleyites and others.
I don't know if Whateleyites is the correct term.
Well, yeah, that'll work. People who live in Whately, and this election, boy, that's a tough question. What's the most important issue?
One of the most important.
One of the most important is clearly the economy. The other's probably the environment.
All right.
And
do you think those are intertwined at all?
totally intertwined, yes. As we're seeing with climate change is going to affect the economy potentially in a very large way.
Yeah, you can see the economic impact already with Hurricane Sandy. There's a lot who would tie that to climate change, many scientists who would say so. Do you think that storms like this occurring more often, is that going to be a significant damper on the economy, change things up?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, there'll certainly be a lot of jobs and work and money spent doing remediation of storm damage, and possibly now there'll be more momentum to do adaptation, civil engineering, projects to make us more resilient in the face of meteorological events that are seemingly more intense. So we'll have to prepare ourselves for that. That'll have an economic impact for sure.
Certainly.
Would you say that the natural disaster that we recently had did anything to the elections this
Sandy?
Yes.
Oh, I would say Sandy certainly, I think, helped Obama in as much as you had the mayor of New York, Bloomberg, who's an independent, come out and support Obama. You also had Governor of New Jersey, Christie, be very enthusiastically thankful for Obama's being on the spot and on the job, and I think that's got to help. 2 months ago, Christie was lambasting Obama for being a do-nothing guy, and here he is in New Jersey as soon as the storm happened. So it makes Obama look good.
I would say so. It definitely looks like a leader who's doing things.
Yeah.
You work at Mount Wachusett College, correct?
I do.
Would you say that the students that you work with there are certain opinions there? Like, what would you say that the college
I really don't know. I teach a couple of courses there. I'm a consultant for their energy management program. And as you know, I also am a co-director of a nonprofit called Center for Environmental Civics. So I'm very busy in all these different involvements, and you know, I can only tell you about the students in my class. We're doing renewable energy, and this is something that's highly dependent on government funding, at least for startups and some subsidies. And so I would say they are probably feeling that government has a role in renewable energy, for one thing, getting us off fossil fuel and reducing our involvement in climate change. And so, you know, I'd say they were sympathetic to policies of that sort, which would make me think they tend more towards Obama than Romney.
As a teacher, would you say that the youth that you deal with are restricting themselves from being out there in the political world, or really wanting to get their opinions heard?
Oh, I think they're involved. In fact, when you say youth, this is a community college, and some of my students are 60 years old. So it's youth is broadly defined. Yes, yes. So yes, I'd say they're very involved, and in fact, one of my students is the head of her town's energy committee. So you know, they're pretty involved. I mean, there's some, you know, 18-year-olds that haven't really thought much about a lot of these issues that are now starting to think about them, and they're giving them good thought, and you know, I think they're responding enthusiastic, getting engaged with them all, which is good.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
When in your position as a professor, how important or urgent do you think these policies like climate change are regarding climate change and energy policy? Do you think that's something that we can maybe diversify and work towards more oil drilling as well as renewable resources, or just go full tilt for the renewables?
Well, you know, to be real, the economy runs on oil, and it also runs on coal, and increasingly on natural gas. And that said, I think we ought to get off those fuels as practically as possible, as soon as possible, given their contribution to climate change. And also to national security and pollution in general. So I think renewables, people will realize, hold great deal of promise for creating more employment opportunities. I mean, certainly you have opportunities in energy conservation, in weatherization, in retrofitting, and all those things are very labor-intensive jobs that help reduce our use of fossil fuels and create jobs in the process. And then there's the renewable technologies of solar, wind, and hydro, et cetera, geothermal, biomass. Those also are, many of those are fairly small-scale, labor-intensive proposals. Of course, you have some big wind farms, but even those require a lot of people to maintain them and keep them going. So, you know, I think it's going to be good for the economy ultimately. Right now, the main problem, and I would never run for office other than Selectman by saying something like this, but basically the problem is that carbon is too cheap. And so we're going to have a lot of carbon going into the atmosphere until it's priced to the point where people really see a need and feel a need to conserve it. And we'll maybe catch up with other countries in that respect eventually, where carbon's much more expensive.
Now, recently in the past few years, say, have you seen any interesting projects or developments in Whately as a select board member that would be trending toward this green economy?
There are several solar farms that are being proposed and in the works. In fact, if people want to look at one, they can go down Christian Lane and look over beyond the transfer station. There's I believe it's almost a 2 megawatt solar array being installed there. There may be one near the elementary school. There may be one over near Fairview Farms. And while I'm all for solar, I think it also raises interesting questions, particularly in prime agricultural land, about land use issues. I mean, do you want to dedicate a lot of acreage to solar production, or do you want to dedicate it to crop production? And so this is a discussion that is just beginning to be held, and it's a very interesting one. It's not clear what the best path is in every situation.
Thinking about crop production versus, say, solar production on land, do you think that it might hurt emerging solar industries to be subsidizing crops and land like that, say in more western or southern states?
be subsidizing solar?
Be subsidizing crops like corn or soy or large-scale things.
I think you raise a good point. The agricultural bill that's before Congress is chock full of subsidies to big agriculture, and I don't think that's an economically wise course. I don't think ethanol is a good use necessarily of corn. I believe it takes more energy to produce a gallon of ethanol than you actually get out of the gallon of ethanol. So is that smart?
That doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem like, you know, it's close to that. It may not be. It may not be more, but
Right.
it takes a lot of energy to make a gallon of ethanol. And the question is that what you want to use your food crops for, or do you want to, you know, use your food crops for feeding people? Now, of course, that raises a whole nother question about how do people eat and how do you feed them? Do you raise corn for food stock for cattle, and then people eat beef? And, you know, again, eating beef is a thing that many people enjoy, and you know, it's got a lot of impact on the economy. On the other hand, 1 pound of beef requires 10 pounds of corn, which requires 100 gallons of water, and so forth and so on. So you have to ask yourself, you know, should we cut down on our meat eating? Perhaps not eliminate it, but cut down on it, or, you know, go for more organic beef production, and then use agriculture to produce other crops that may be more directly usable by people, like wheat.
So say if these subsidies for these crops that would be fed to food animals, like cattle,
Yep.
If these subsidies were removed or lessened, we might see large increases in the prices of meat.
Yeah, you'd see an increase in the price of beef. And, you know, it would more reflect the free market.
So we might have a more efficient food system.
You might have people making other decisions about what to eat, for sure. That's right. And that might be good. I mean, you know, it's hard to predict. There are a lot of subsidies for the energy companies right now, not just renewables. I mean, I know people say that, you know, we're giving a lot of money to Solyndra and all these solar companies, but in fact we're giving much more money to the fossil fuel industries. Is that a good investment also of tax dollars? It's keeping the price of fossil fuels low, which is good because it allows you to, you know, drive your car more cheaply. On the other hand, you know, is it good for the environment? And ultimately, you know, it has other impacts that may not be so great. But
it's hard to make the argument for it necessarily. I mean, ExxonMobil, the most profitable company in the history of maybe the world, I believe.
Maybe.
It's hard to justify subsidizing it, but it seems to keep happening.
It seems to keep happening. Well, the funny thing is when people become hugely profitable and economically well endowed, they tend to stay that way because why?
Well, there's money.
That's right. And as you see in this election, we're spending what? How many billions of dollars to elect?
$2 billion on the presidential.
On the presidential election. That's $2,000 million. That's a lot of money. And whose money is that coming from? I mean, you know, and now we have Citizens United versus the FEC, and so that's allowing all sorts of people and institutions to make investments without disclosing who they are and where the money's coming from. And you're seeing the natural consequence of that is there's a lot of money going to certain candidates, a lot of candidates, and you know, how does that affect our democracy? I tend to think that has a corrosive effect on democracy.
Yeah, especially in the Senate race, say, in this state. You see over 50% of finances that are coming from special interest groups, you see it coming from out of state,
Right.
in both the Warren and Brown camps.
Well,
Do you think that's a bad thing, say, for a local
I think
race?
it's a terrible thing. I think money in politics is a very toxic brew, and I think that there ought to be campaign finance, and it ought to be publicly financed. And also, I think the whole campaign calendar ought to be shortened. I think it's absurd to spend. Mitt Romney's been running for president for 7 years. That's too long. It's, you know, let's get real. Let's have 6 months for the election of president, and that's it. And let's have campaign finance reform, and let's let's cut this out, you know, and let's inform the people. You know, a lot of this money, what it's going into is very misleading television commercials that people see and hear over and over and over again, and you're not learning anything in these commercials. And some of the commercials are just wrong. So, you know, that's a whole nother thing. Of course, people are free to say whatever they want when they're running for office, but...
Are they free to say lies?
Yes, they are.
Wow.
They're free to lie. That's a
ridiculous.
constitutional right. It's freedom of speech. So, you know, do you want to pay for that? Or do you want to be subjected to it? Probably not. But, you know, you have to be an informed voter, and you have to make a choice, and you have to have good information. Now, where's the good information coming from? Well, that's an issue.
Would you say that with campaign financing and for the campaign ads themselves, would you say that they're a lot different this year than they have been in past elections?
I don't know, because I don't watch them.
Well, that's good.
I don't watch TV very much, so I don't watch ads. And when the ads come on, I hit the mute button. So I don't know what they're saying. I mean, that's a little exaggeration.
Well,
I've heard Scott Brown says it's the person, not the party, because he doesn't want to be associated with the Republicans or something. And Warren, I don't know what her spiel is, but you know, it's equally sort of vaporous, or you know, appealing emotionally.
All right, so they're all mudslingers.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if they're mudslingers. They're politicians, and you know, they're trying to get elected.
All
All's
right.
fair in politics.
Well, thank you, Paul Newlin.
Well, you're welcome.
Selectman
Alex
from Whately.
Fortune,
And thank you for your
Alexis
time.
Foley. Nice to talk to you
It's
both.
great to have you on.
Nice to be on. Thanks. Everybody go out there and vote.
Vote.